My name is Catherine. People often tell me I'm a bit airheaded, but I think I'm just normal. We are a family of three me, my husband, Bob, and our son, Chris. However, we live in a two-family house, so Bob's parents, Emily and Jack, also live in the same building. I'm just an ordinary housewife. Bob and I got married 20 years ago, and we met at work. At that time, Bob was my supervisor, and as a new graduate, he was someone out of my reach and unapproachable to me. However, that completely changed during a company party. With his tough looking face, I had assumed Bob was a heavy drinker, but it turned out he was the complete opposite. When I went over to pour his drink, he apologized with a flushed face.
Don't worry too much about the formalities, okay? Sorry about that.
The contrast with his stern expression at work caught me off guard, and I blurted out.
Bob, you're surprisingly cute for how you look.
Bob blinked in surprise. Then his already red face turned an even deeper shade of crimson.
That's the first time anyone's called me cute.
He was intensely embarrassed. In that moment, I felt for Bob. We started talking more at work, and eventually, Bob confessed his feelings to me. At the time, Bob was 30, and he later told me it took a lot of courage to confess to a 20-year-old. Apparently, he was concerned about our 10-year age difference, but it didn't bother me at all. If anything, I was glad to have someone so reliable to guide me since I tend to be a bit absent-minded. 2 years after we started dating, we decided to get married. We drove 3 hours to my parents' house to introduce Bob, and soon it was time to meet Emily and Jack for the first time. Bob's parents' house was only an hour away by car. When we arrived, I saw it was a beautiful single-family home in a quiet neighborhood.
Wow, it's so big. So, this is the house you grew up in.
I was excited to see the home where the man I loved had been raised. Emily, covering her mouth, laughed softly.
You're such a sweet girl. Come on in.
Dressed in an elegant pink dress, Emily looked much younger than her age. Perhaps because Bob had already told them he was considering marrying me, Emily and Jack listened to our marriage announcement with warm smiles.
Have you decided on the venue yet?
We're planning to decide together. We want a small, intimate ceremony with just close family and friends, something we can afford with our savings.
Suddenly, Emily's expression changed.
That won't do at all. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. It should be a grand affair where you introduce the bride and groom to everyone.
Bob sighed and responded.
These days, a lot of couples choose a more low-key wedding. Besides, it's better to save the money for our future and raising kids rather than spending it all on one day.
I don't care about trends. I refuse to attend such a dull wedding.
Jack, noticing Emily's reluctance, stepped in.
If this is what they want, we shouldn't interfere. Catherine, I'm sorry about that. I apologize on behalf of my wife.
The tension between Emily and Jack was palpable, so I forced a smile and said,
It's okay. I'm not bothered by it.
Later, when Bob and Jack stepped out of the room, Emily turned to me and said,
How did a young girl who knows nothing manage to ensnare Bob?
I was so dazed with nerves and fatigue that I thought I must have misheard her and didn't respond. Looking back now, I realized those words were meant for me. Afterward, Bob explained what kind of person Emily was. She came from a well-known family and was raised as a proper lady. Although her family line ended because they didn't have any heirs, the values she grew up with remained deeply ingrained in her. Talking to Emily, I could see she truly had the air of a spoiled lady.
Expensive things are good things, and saving money is miserable.
This was something Emily often said. Every time I heard this phrase, which was so different from my own values, I couldn't help but be oddly impressed by her. However, the idea of having a grand wedding was one thing I firmly declined. After the wedding, my husband and I started living with Emily and Jack. Though we lived together, we had rebuilt their house into a two-family home, so our living spaces, finances, and even meals were completely separate. 6 months after we got married, I became pregnant and decided to quit my job when I gave birth. I wanted to focus on raising our child. Bob respected my decision and told me he would work harder with overtime to make up for it. After giving birth to Chris and settling into life at home, I noticed something. Jack was still working, but Emily was a stay-at-home wife who had never even worked part-time. Yet, Emily was never home during the day. Every day, Emily would dress up and go out for various hobbies, classes, or lunches. Sometimes, she would come by our place and leave designer handbags or kids' clothes for Bob and Chris.
I'm tight on money this month too. Don't tell Jack, okay?
This phrase was something Emily started saying around that time. Now, as for the gifts, Bob is particular about his things. So even if it's a high-end designer bag, he won't use it unless he really likes it. And as for Chris's clothes, he would outgrow them so quickly that there was no need to buy expensive ones.
If she's short on money, she doesn't need to bring gifts.
I can't count how many times I wanted to say that, but knowing it would probably upset Emily and not wanting to cause any trouble, I always swallowed my words. Moreover, whenever Emily brought a gift, she would always ask about my plans for the day. Since my life revolved around Chris, who wasn't even in preschool yet, I practically had no plans of my own. That's when Emily would pounce and say,
Could you clean my houses on this day? You're not busy anyway, right? You can do it, can't you?
I didn't have a good reason to refuse, so I reluctantly agreed. She asked me to do this nearly every week, sometimes as often as once a week. And of course, she always made sure to remind me to keep it a secret from Jack. When I went to clean Emily's house, the place was always a mess and dusty. I would start by cleaning a corner of the living room, setting up a playpen for Chris, and then get to work.
This is like something a cleaning service would do.
While I sang with Chris or let him watch TV if he seemed bored, I made it my mission to leave the house spotless, almost out of spite. By the time I finished, I was so exhausted that I couldn't do anything else for the rest of the day. This cleaning routine continued for quite a while. It finally ended thanks to Bob. Bob took a half day off work, and when he came home, he heard Chris and me talking from his parents' house. That's when he found out everything that had been going on.
What do you think Catherine is? A maid? She's not a housekeeper?
Bob was furious on my behalf. The fact that Bob was on my side made me happy, so much so that my anger towards Emily disappeared. Emily must have been really shaken by Bob's anger because she never asked me to clean her house again after that. Instead, she started hiring a professional cleaning service to come regularly. I remember being surprised that she still refused to do any cleaning herself. Eventually, when Chris started going to preschool, I found myself with some free time and decided to start working part-time. Emily frowned upon this too and complained,
Won't people start gossiping that Bob's salary isn't enough? And what if Chris ends up feeling neglected?
Even though I usually avoided arguing, I couldn't let this go.
Bob's salary is more than enough. I want to work. I want to show Chris that his mom is doing her best too.
A mother's job is to always be beautiful and kind, isn't it?
Emily seemed unconvinced as she spoke. but I just let it go. I focused on my part-time jobs without worrying too much. As Chris grew older, I gradually increased my working hours and days. Bob and Chris, seeing how hard I was working, began helping out more around the house, and I was really grateful for their support. Chris grew up well and is now a high school senior. We were concerned about his future, but he worked hard and earned good grades, so he was able to secure a spot through an internal recommendation. We informed both sets of parents about Chris's future plans, and we all felt relief. Just when I thought we could finally relax, Emily suddenly showed up one day.
So, Chris got a recommendation, huh? He's just as brilliant as Bob, isn't he?
Thank you. Yes, we're very proud of him. I welcomed Emily into the living room and served her coffee, but something felt off. She offered her congratulations, but Emily didn't bring any gifts. Emily, who was raised as a proper lady and was always concerned with appearances, often secretly brought over expensive sweets or children's clothes, even after the cleaning incident. It was strange, especially since this was the perfect occasion to celebrate Chris's achievement. Then Emily asked,
Where are Chris and Bob?
"At school and work. It's a weekday afternoon after all."
Oh, I see. So it's just you at home right now.
I didn't understand what Emily was getting at, so I looked at her, puzzled. Then she suddenly became serious.
You know that education insurance, right? The one for Chris's tuition you mentioned it's about to reach maturity, didn't you?
Yes, that's right.
Could you lend me some of that money? Just between us. Jack's salary has been cut due to the recession, and I have an upcoming recital and a planned trip with friends. I'm really short on funds. I just need a little. About $5,000.
$5,000. I was genuinely shocked that she mentioned such a large sum so casually. There's no way I can lend you that kind of money.
Even $3,000 would do. After all, you're supposed to get over $10,000 from that insurance, right?
It's not that they give it to us, it's the money Bob and I saved for Chris's tuition coming back to us.
Oh, come on. If it's for his tuition, there are always student loans. He should pay for his own education. I need the money now. This should be the priority.
Emily persisted with her unreasonable demands. For once, I was genuinely angry, so I firmly said in a strong tone, "No, absolutely not." Emily seemed to take offense.
Fine, forget it.
She stood up and shot me a sharp glare.
You're such a stingy, heartless person, Catherine. Chris is going to turn out just as awful, being raised by someone like you.
Even after Emily left, I couldn't shake my anger, so I cooked dinner with a glass of wine in hand. I'd always thought Emily was a difficult person, unable to give up her luxurious lifestyle despite claiming to be short on money, but I had managed to put up with her so far. I told myself that's just how people like her are. But for her to insult Chris just because I refused her unreasonable request for a loan, that was beyond unacceptable. My anger flared. Later that night, after Chris went to his room, I told Bob everything that had happened, including Emily's final harsh words. "And there's something I've been keeping from you. I lent Emily some money before, and she still hasn't paid it back."
What? You too?
We realized that both of us had lent small amounts of money to Emily without knowing the other had done the same. We had wanted to avoid any tension with Emily and Jack, considering we were living under the same roof. But Emily had taken advantage of that. "Bob, I can't forgive Emily anymore."
Neither can I. I've had enough of my mother.
We both agreed that we needed to move out, even though we felt bad for Jack. But Bob, there's something I really want to do before we leave. I couldn't let go of Emily's cruel words, so I proposed a plan to Bob. I'm going to make sure she regrets insulting not just me, but Chris too. I clenched my fists in determination. Over the next month, I quietly prepared for my plan. Once I had everything ready, and with Bob and Chris on board, we decided to take action. It was a weekend just after the start of December, and we waited until dinner time when we knew both Emily and Jack would be home before ringing their doorbell. We told them we had something important to discuss and were invited into their side of the house. Sitting on the living room sofa, Bob dramatically apologized.
It seems Catherine accidentally opened some envelopes that were in our mailbox. I'm really sorry.
Following Bob's lead, I spread 5 envelopes and folded papers across the table.
What?
Emily gasped in shock. The envelopes contained tax bills, credit card statements, and overdue notices. I'd spend a month collecting these, carefully selecting the ones with alarming words like urgent and important. Since our house shares the same address and the same surname written across the postbox as theirs, it's not uncommon for their mail to end up in our mailbox. Sometimes, when I'm working in the yard, the mail carrier hands me all the mail for both houses at once. From all the letters I've seen addressed to Emily, I've learned to recognize the types of envelopes that signal financial trouble just by their color or markings. Today, I carefully selected the most alarming ones to bring with me.
What is this? You're behind on so many payments?
Jack looked at Emily, his eyes wide with surprise. As expected, Jack had no idea that Emily's spending had gotten so out of control. Emily stammered.
I just forgot. I'll pay them all tomorrow.
She quickly tried to gather the papers off the table, making excuses as she went. As we were leaving, I pretended to suddenly remember something and added, "Some of these are close to their due dates, aren't they? I'm really sorry for bringing them over so late." I smiled sweetly at Emily, who was glaring at me with a bitter expression from behind Jack. 2 weeks later, as I had anticipated, Emily showed up at our house again during the day when both Bob and Chris were out. I was calm and ready for her visit. As soon as she entered the living room, she said,
I have a favor to ask. Could you handle these payments for me? I'm so busy, and it's hard to get to the bank during business hours.
The papers she laid out on the table included property tax bills, car tax bills, and even some payment slips for online shopping. There were definitely more of them than when I had shown them to Jack. You know, you don't need to go to the bank for these. You can pay them at a convenience store. This one for online shopping is specifically for store payment. I started with a light jab as a greeting. Then I added something more serious. And by the way, Emily, you've been making purchases in my name, haven't you? I've received several payment slips for items I never bought. I took this opportunity to confront her. I never use deferred payment when shopping online. And it's clearly suspicious that I've been receiving payment slips without ever getting the actual items. She had been making purchases under my name and having the gift sent to herself. So that's how it was. She's craftier than I thought. But she doesn't realize that these things eventually get exposed.
I don't know anything about that. Do you have any proof?
If you look at the payment slips we've already paid, you can see what was purchased. If those items are at your houses, that would be the proof, wouldn't it? I said this with a smile, and Emily was at a loss for words.
Fine, I'll pay it all back, but not right now. I need to handle these payments first. This is tax money. It's urgent. We're family, so it's only natural to help each other out.
Family? I repeated the word, pretending not to understand, then paused before responding. I'm single. I'm no longer part of your family.
What?
Emily froze in shock, and I continued, lowering my voice and speaking in a monotone as if I were reciting a script. We've been having issues with money for a while, and it caused problems between Bob and me. He blamed me for wasting money, including the money I lent to you. But I couldn't tell him the truth, and my part-time job wasn't enough to cover it, so our marriage started falling apart. So we decided to separate, and we got divorced recently. Hearing this, Emily's frustration boiled over.
Divorced without even consulting us? How could you do something so selfish? This is why I didn't want a daughter-in-law who's just young and has manners.
She spat those words at me and left. Even after that, Emily kept coming back, demanding money in an arrogant tone, but I continued to refuse, reminding her that I was now just a stranger. When January came around, I finally left the house on my own. In February, Chris moved out to live on his own for college, and shortly after, Bob completed his move as well. Our entire family left the house we shared with Emily and Jack, leaving no trace of us behind. After we left, Emily and Jack reportedly had a serious discussion. This is what I heard from Jack later.
Catherine told me that part of the reason Bob and her separated was because of your debts. Do you realize how outrageous it is to make purchases under Catherine's name and stick her with the bill?
When Jack confronted her, Emily reportedly flew into a rage. She lashed out.
What's the big deal? She was my daughter-in-law, so it's only natural that she should pay for those things, and I only bought what was necessary for my beauty and health. I told her to keep it a secret, but she went behind my back and tattled to you. It's a good thing they divorced.
This incident has made one thing clear. The one with the twisted morals is you. I want a divorce. I don't need a partner like you for the rest of my life. Hand over all the bank books you've been holding.
What? But
Reluctantly, Emily handed over the bank books, and when Jack reviewed them, he discovered that their savings accounts had been emptied. The credit cards were maxed out, and she had even resorted to revolving credit. Jack was speechless when he learned the full extent of it. I had suspected as much. Even though Jack had a managerial position, he was still just a regular employee, and there was no way his salary could keep up with Emily's extravagant spending. It was either debt, or she was dipping into money she shouldn't have touched, or likely both. When she came after our education fund, I figured she must have been in pretty deep trouble, and it turns out I was right. In the end, Jack sold the two-family house, paid off Emily's debts, and divorced her without any division of assets due to her misappropriation. Still, perhaps feeling guilty about throwing her out with nothing after she'd never worked a day in her life, he gave her $10,000 for living expenses and sent her on her way. Bob wasn't too pleased with Jack's generosity, calling him soft, but without a source of income, that $10,000 will disappear in no time. Emily, who loved flaunting expensive gifts but would never consider working for a living, will likely find herself in financial trouble again soon. It's her own fault. On the other hand, I'm now enjoying life with Bob in a condo we bought together. Telling Emily that we got divorced was a complete lie. I moved out on my own first to make the story believable. But the new place I moved into was a condo that Bob and I picked out and purchased together. With Chris moving out as well, we thought it was the perfect time to use our savings as a down payment on a brand new condo. Our new life is nothing short of blissful. No more being summoned out of the blue to become the cleaning lady, and no more being stuck with payments for mysterious beauty devices. We no longer have to deal with the hassle of someone like Emily, and Bob and I are enjoying what feels like a second honeymoon. We didn't want to lie to Jack, so we told him in advance about our plan to pretend we were getting a divorce. So Emily is the only one who believes that Bob and I have actually divorced. We have no intention of ever telling her the truth or revealing our new address. Bob and I both agree that we never want to have anything to do with Emily again. Jack, having sold the big house, is currently living in temporary housing, but he's looking for a good property near us. I'm fond of Jack, and he's always been kind to us, so I hope he finds a great place. In the next holiday, Bob and I are planning to visit Chris at his apartment, where he's living on his own. Right now, I'm surrounded by the people I love, and I'm living a happy, carefree life. This is the happiest I've ever been in my entire life.